Welcome and good morning to those of you who are just logging on now. We're going to give it a couple minutes to give everybody a chance to settle in and let us know you're here. You can drop your name and your organization into the chat. We'll get going in just a couple minutes. Morning, Nicole. Morning, Keisha. Morning, Femi. Kate. Thanks for introducing yourselves, everyone. If you haven't done so yet, feel free to drop your name in the chat and where you're from, your organization. We'll give it just another minute. Morning, Edith and Andrea. Good morning, Dr. Scott. And welcome to everyone who has just joined us. Good morning and happy Friday. If you haven't introduced yourself in the chat, please feel free to do so. Thanks to everyone who already has done that. It's great to have you here. We'll give it just one more minute and then we'll dive in and get started. Morning, Melissa. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good morning again, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Laura Brooks, and I'm with the Community Mental Health Board of Oak Park Township. For those of you who are new to our professional development workshops, welcome. And for those who have been here before, welcome back. On behalf of the Mental Health Board and River Edge Hospital, thank you for taking the time to be with us. In addition to our speaker, who I'll introduce in a moment, I'm joined here today by my colleague from the Community Mental Health Board, Melissa Lobring, as well as by Fatima Villasenor from River Edge Hospital. So before we get started with the presentation, we have just a few housekeeping items to go over. First, our speaker would like this to be an engaging workshop. So if you haven't done so already, and I know many of you have, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, just your name and your organization. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties at any point this morning, please chat the hosts and we'll do our best to address it. Next, our presenter has saved some time for Q&A. So if you have questions for her, feel free to drop them into the Q&A so we don't lose them in the chat. Also, she has built in a brief break midway through today's presentation, so we'll all have an opportunity to step away for a little bit for a few moments to grab a coffee or a tea or a water refill, or just to stretch and stand up, do whatever you need to do for yourselves. Finally, and importantly, I want to cover CEU procedures. So to be eligible for CEUs, you must participate in at least 75% of today's webinar, and you must also fill out an evaluation by the deadline. Due to requirements implemented by the state related to CEUs for virtual workshops, you will now also have to complete a post-test, passing with a score of 80% or greater in 3 attempts by the deadline. We will post a link to the evaluation and post-test in the chat at the end of today's webinar, so you'll be able to fill them out immediately. We will also email a link to the evaluation and post-test later today. Both will be open for 1 week through Friday, April 17th. After the evaluation and the post-test close, CEU certificates will be emailed within 2 to 3 weeks to those who attended at least 75% of today's webinar, submitted an evaluation by the deadline, and passed the post-test with a score of at least 80% in 3 attempts by the deadline. If you have any CEU questions, please contact the organizers through Eventbrite and we'll get you some answers. Okay, without further ado, let's get started with today's presentation. We are so pleased to have Allison Chamberlain with us today to present her workshop, Let's Get Motivated, Utilizing Motivational Interviewing in the IDDD Population. Allison is a board-certified behavior analyst and the Associate Director of the Illinois Crisis Prevention Network, or ICPN. Funded by the Illinois Department of Human Services, ICPN provides support service teams to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities experiencing behavioral and or medical challenges in their current residential settings across the state. Previously, Allison was the clinical supervisor at Project 12 Ways, serving families with a history of child abuse or neglect utilizing applied behavior analysis. Prior to that, she worked as a housing specialist at Chestnut Health Systems, serving people with acute mental health diagnoses in a residential setting. In today's webinar, Allison will explore the history of motivational interviewing, helping us to understand the origins, basic structure, and how to best utilize it with IDDD populations. Motivational interviewing is designed to help address the ambivalence associated with resistance to change and create a framework for how to work with people in a wide variety of situations to help identify their goals and find the internal motivation necessary for change. With the understanding that changing behavior can be extremely difficult and can even lead to damaged therapeutic relationships and power struggles, we'll learn how motivational interviewing uses an empathetic, person-centered approach to working with individuals living with IDDD on making changes in their own lives. And with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to Allison.
Thank you very much, Laura. I appreciate that. I am extremely excited to be here today talking about motivational interviewing. I think the first thing that I want to do is just kind of talk about a little bit of my background. As Laura mentioned, I'm currently one of the associate directors for the support services team. And why I feel like that's relevant to bring up specifically more is one of the reasons why we work with people. So when we get referrals in the community, people have intellectual disability diagnosis, developmental disability diagnosis, and about 80 to 85% of those also have a comorbid mental health diagnosis. We're trying to help stabilize that person so they don't have to go into a more, at least into a more restrictive environment. And I will say at least 50%, if not more of the time when we go in and we assess the situation, there's some really damaged relationships occurring between the person that we're serving and their caregiver network, whether that's family members, direct support workers that work in the group home or SILA, maybe even members of the interdisciplinary team. And that's not at any fault of that person or because they're trying to do that. It's just because sometimes working with people with challenging behaviors can be difficult and creates rifts in relationships. And it's not that we need to do any specific training or this or that. It's that a relationship is so damaged and so difficult to manage that then that person starts engaging in some really challenging behaviors as a result. And a lot of the different I guess populations that I've worked in, you're trying to convince somebody that they need to do something for themselves, whether that's go to therapy, whether that's looking at changing some skills in their life, whether it's, changing different things that they're doing with themselves or with other people. And that is a very difficult thing to do. I think me personally, I am a pretty resistant person. So if somebody tells me don't press the red button, I am going to press it immediately and with gusto. And so I really kind of understand that ambivalence that comes from it too, and just the sense of autonomy. And when people try to tell you what to do, what that does to that autonomy. So today I want everybody to really kind of think about how am I wanting to use this in my world and my life? And how can I adapt it for that? Because obviously it's going to have its core framework and how you do it, but you're going to have to really think about the person that you're wanting to utilize it with and how best to work with them. And so I really want people to kind of think about that. I think that's going to help guide some of your questions along the way, because there is no specific one framework for working with somebody. And I think, and especially in the IDD population, we have to modify the things that we're doing with people so that it does work with them. And so I think that's just going to be something that I really want people to kind of think of in their mind while we go through this, and how am I going to adapt this and use this and make it beneficial in my world. So I'm going to start off with just a little bit of history of motivational interviewing and how it came out and how it was created. And let's see here. I'm going to have to click. My slides are a little stuck. I apologize. So motivational interviewing was originally created in the 1980s by a gentleman named William R. Miller. And so he kind of saw the impact of therapist behavior on client. And so he was paying attention to how does the therapist specifically impact the client and their motivation to change, their ability to have that insight of the problems that they're dealing with and how this specifically the therapist impacted those things for them. And he realized that while working with patients with alcohol abuse originally. So, when looking at the history of motivational interviewing, it started originally with people struggling with alcohol abuse. So, he questioned the confrontational methods, which involved direct persuasion or confrontation aimed at overcoming client resistance. So, basically, saying at that point, the therapist was trying to convince the person that they needed to change and telling them, alcohol abuse is dangerous for you. It's not good for your health. It's damaging your relationships. It's damaging your work, or whatever ways that they're trying to persuade that person and confront them about their problems. As I'm sure most of you know, that approach doesn't work very well, and can make people very defensive and resistant and even potentially spiteful when you point out people's errors and what they're doing wrong. He noticed that a more empathetic and client centered approach could effectively enhance motivation for change. And I know some of you are probably thinking, like, well, yes, of course. But I also want you guys to kind of maybe think back on some of the conversations that you've had with some of the people that really didn't go that well. I know I've been stuck in kind of some of those traps with people where I have had those long talks where I'm trying to convince this person of something. And if I can just get through to them, then they're going to realize and they're going to change and everything's going to be great. And so I have fallen victim to those traps as well. And I will tell you that has never worked for me. I have never been successful in that approach. And usually I don't do it with intent. I don't go to a client session thinking, I'm going to convince this person, to stop doing this or to start doing this. And I'm going to talk them into it. What happens usually is I get kind of pulled in by a conversation with them, and I might get a little frustrated. I might be able to think that I can convince them. And so when you're on the outside of things, you see things very differently, right? You see the problem, you see the effects that it has on the world around them. But on the inside, it's very different. And I also want everybody to have some compassion and grace today while thinking about this, because most of us do things that aren't exactly helpful either in some way, shape, or form. It might be more severe for other people than others, kind of what that is. But I know that there's things that I do that are not good for me. I might eat bad things. I might stay up late. Um, I might decide to have ice cream at midnight. I might decide to skip appointments that I'm supposed to go to for medical reasons, right? And so those are not helpful things for me. But I do them anyways, and I have autonomy and I choose to do that. I think the other thing that is important to remember is a lot of times I see when serving the IDD population is that there is kind of like this thought or this expectation that they can't do things wrong. They can't make errors. They can't make bad judgment calls. And when they do, sometimes the IDT just kind of comes down on them. And, maybe somebody sent some inappropriate pictures to somebody that they know. And the next thing you know, the IDT is calling this huge meeting and confronting this person where they're kind of by themselves. And you maybe have 6 or 7 people confronting them about, why did you send those pictures, and that's not safe and that's not okay. And that wouldn't happen to us and our world, for the most of us, I believe. And so I just want everybody to kind of think of that and have some compassion and grace for them as well, and that they are allowed to make mistakes and they are allowed to make bad choices, just like everybody else is. And just because they do that, we don't need to come down on them and convince them that they're not supposed to do that. And as you know, that is not an effective approach. And we'll talk about why today and what we can do instead. The other thing is that really damages relationships. So when you confront somebody about something that is not ideal and you are trying to convince them to change, or just even confronting them about it in a very confrontational way, that can really damage your relationship with that person. Imagine how potentially embarrassing that is for the person, how much that might make them angry at you, how it might hurt their feelings. Maybe they don't trust you after that, or they don't want to tell you things anymore because they don't want to be chastised or made to feel like what they're doing is horrible or awful. So there is a lot of damage that comes from that. And going back to kind of what I originally talked about, what we see a lot of times in the IDD population when there are a lot of challenging behaviors occurring, there's a damaged relationship somewhere. And a lot of times I see this where a caregiver, a family member, a staff person, or whoever it might be is constantly confronting that person about whatever maladaptive behaviors they're engaging in, and basically telling them that it's not appropriate and you need to change. And I've never want to see that work. So I want everybody to kind of keep those things as well in your mind while we go through this today, to kind of keep that in the back of your head. So, in regards to the formal development of motivational interviewing, it took shape in collaboration with Stephen Rolnick, who was a psychologist with experience in health psychology. Their partnership began in the late 1980s, and that kind of brought a broader perspective to motivational interviewing, incorporating elements from a client centered therapy founded by Carl Rogers. So, Rogers' emphasis on empathy, non-judgmental listening, and unconditional positive reward, that is supposed to be reward, became core components of motivational interviewing's approach. Um, and one of the founding books with all the information in it, and I think now it's on like its third or fourth edition. It was Miller and Rolnick's book. It was called Motivational Interviewing: Preparing People to Change Addictive Behavior. It was published in 1991, formalizing motivational interviewing as a distinct therapeutic approach. And so that was one of the original books that was published about motivational interviewing. And so, like I said, I do believe they've got different editions out now. And so, if you're really interested, I would say that would be a good book to check out. Okay. So, over the following decades, motivational interviewing's popularity expanded rapidly, finding applications far beyond addiction treatment. It spread to healthcare settings for managing chronic illnesses, criminal justice programs for rehabilitation efforts, and even education and sports coaching. The approach gained widespread recognition due to its emphasis on collaboration and respect for the client's autonomy, which resonated across various cultural and professional settings. And so, looking at some of the different settings that this was applied in, addiction treatment, so we know that's the origins of it, right? It was originally developed for alcohol use disorders. And now it has spread out to things like tobacco, opioids, stimulants, and helps the individuals explores their ambivalence towards quitting and enhances their commitment to sobriety. Looking at healthcare settings, there is a wide range of application in healthcare settings, and they're using it to encourage lifestyle changes such as increasing physical activity, improving diet, adhering to medication regimes, managing chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease. It's used by nurses, physicians, dietitians, and other health professionals to support behavior change without dictating solutions. And if you think about the medical kind of paradigm, it kind of has a lot of that confrontation and directive built in. So somebody's telling you, what you're doing is directly damaging, this part of your body. And you need to do X, Y, and Z to not do that. And so there's a lot of kind of that confrontation just built in naturally. It's not necessarily meant to be that way because obviously they have to educate you on what's happening, but it can feel very confrontational. And so that's why I think that this is really good in looking in the healthcare settings. And so even if you have somebody that you're working with that maybe does a lot of medication refusals, this might be an appropriate approach to use with that person to try to increase medication compliance. Looking at mental health application, this helps supports treatment of mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression by enhancing motivation for activities that improve well-being, like engaging in social activities or following a treatment plan. So looking at some of the treatment modules for depression is coming into contact with reinforcing experiences or pleasant activities and kind of getting that person to actually follow through and do those things can be very beneficial. I know a lot of times we work with people and, we have things that we would like for them to do, and they will just say, oh, that doesn't work for me without even trying it or coming in contact with it. And so this could be a really helpful approach in that concept of how do we get this person to maybe do X, Y, and Z so that we can get them to see the benefits of it. Okay, going down to, I want to go back to mental health for just a minute. It also plays a role in addressing behaviors like self-harm or suicidal ideation. And so I think that's going to be very beneficial for people to look at that. And I think that would be a long road in working with somebody to address those behaviors specifically, because I think there would need to be quite a lot of rapport built up with that person first. But it's definitely something to look into and to consider. In the criminal justice and corrections department, MI is employed in rehabilitation programs to motivate offenders to engage in pro-social behaviors to reduce recidivism. So we're trying to prevent them from going back to jail or prison. It helps people on probation and parole settings consider the consequences of their actions and make positive life changes. In education and youth services, motivational interviewing is used in schools. It's used to help address student behavioral issues, support goal setting, and improve academic engagement. It can also be effective in working with at-risk youth to prevent substance abuse or other risky behaviors. And in the sports and coaching field, MI is used by coaches to enhance athletes' motivation, their goal setting skills, and mental resilience. This approach helps athletes overcome performance anxiety and commit to training regimes. So some of those studies, if you're interested, Miller and Rolnick 2023, Luvinus, Aeronaut, and Marenfield 2017. And if you just go and do any scholarly search, you're going to be able to find the application or field that you would want to look at. So if you just put in like motivational interviewing and weight management or blood glucose management, then you're going to be able to find those studies related to that and then see the specific application in regards to that problem. And so I do just want to remind people that today is going to be a very general overview of the framework and the processes of motivational interviewing. I'm not going to get too much into the nitty gritty of like specifics working with that person. And so that I feel like you would really want to do some research for that. I mean, I can help guide that for you, but I just kind of want to remind everybody that we're doing a general overview framework today. Okay, so what is motivational interviewing? It's client-centered counseling approach designed to help people find the motivation to make a positive behavior change. It is designed to help address the ambivalence associated with change, and it combines evidence-based approaches from cognitive psychology and social psychology. It also assumes varying levels of readiness for change. And so when you think about somebody who may have something that they're doing or not doing, so either if you're looking at increasing in behavior or decreasing in behavior, that person might one day be very motivated. And so I want those of you to kind of think back on something that you were trying to change for yourself. Maybe you were trying to exercise more or eat better, or do things like that, or quit smoking or quit drinking. One day you may wake up and be extremely motivated. You know, it is a great day for you. You started off with a walk outside and a protein smoothie, and came back and made a really nice big salad from Seinfeld for lunch, and everything was just wonderful. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, I'm having bacon and, Cadbury eggs for breakfast. So that happens, right? We kind of all have that fluctuation of levels of readiness of change or motivation within our life. That is going to be no different for the people in the IDD population, right? They're going to have good days and bad days just like us. And so that's something that needs to be carried into the approach, is ensuring and making sure that you remember that. So if somebody comes to you one day and you feel like maybe they've had some pretty big setbacks or they're having a down day, we can't get all over them for that. That is human nature. That is how people are. And we are the exact same way. And so that's just a day to be very compassionate and validating with them. And hopefully we will have a much more motivated day after that. And people are not fundamentally unmotivated to make changes. They are ambivalent, and problem behavior conflicts with at least some aspect of their self-concepts, values, and or goals. So guess what? I don't like the way that my clothes feel on me sometimes. But does that mean that I'm also always eating the way that I should and exercising the way that I should? Well, I can tell you, no, I am not, definitely. Right? So there has like that ambivalence, and then also there's conflicting goals and values and thoughts there, right? On one hand, I want to be healthy and I want to live long and I want to, enjoy grandkids when I have them. But then on the other hand, I like drinking things that have sugar in them, and I like eating unhealthy meals, and it's delicious and wonderful. And so you might say, well, those things can't exist together, but you know what? They do. And so we need to be very mindful of that. And I always tell people to kind of look at themselves. And yes, I'm sure out in the audience, there are some wonderfully perfect people who eat and drink and don't do anything they're not supposed to, and all of their goals align with their actions. But for a large majority of people, they don't always. Our actions aren't always lining up with our goals. We make bad choices. We have ambivalence about things. And so I want everybody to kind of remember that. So whenever you're working with somebody, you will be able to kind of have some grace and have some compassion and not come in with that confrontational, judgmental view. It's also a prerequisite that people become aware of their behavioral discrepancies and actively confront. And so, here specifically in the IDD population, I want everyone to realize that it is not going to be appropriate with every single person. Right. So we need somebody to be aware of the behavioral discrepancies and actively confront them. So they have to have skills to do that. And if somebody is not going to be able to have skills to do that, they are not going to be able to benefit from motivational interviewing. And so I really want everybody to remember that before you start kind of expecting to have benefits from somebody. Are they capable of this? And as we go through the program and we look at what it involves, I usually say that if I can sit down and have a conversation with somebody about their behavior or something that's maybe not ideal in their life, chances are motivational interviewing is going to be beneficial to them. But if not, then I don't think that it's going to be for that person. That doesn't mean that you still can't use a lot of the parts of it because they help to build rapport, help to build relationships. But as far as expecting outcomes, I would not. Okay. Okay. Like I've mentioned, change is tough. Um, there's a lot of things out there that are wonderful, but they are not wonderful for us. And for the most part, there is a reason for that. Guess what the majority of the not so wonderful things do? They bring out chemicals in our brain, right? So whenever we overeat, whenever we eat things that have sugar, drinking, smoking, drugs, there is a biological reason why those things are addictive and why they are hard to quit and hard to change. Even spending, risky behaviors like excessive shopping, excessive spending, sexual behaviors, those types of things, they become part of who we are in our routine. And not only just from like a biological component, but from a routine of who we are, that makes it so challenging to break and to quit them. And so any of you who have ever tried to quit something that is tough, like smoking or eating bad food, or maybe changing something in your personal routine, like adding something into your routine, like exercise, those things are very difficult to do. And so I just want to make sure that we're remembering that and we have those expectations that it is extremely hard for everybody, whether you have disabilities or not. And so that's something that I just try to have a lot of compassion for people. I think for me, I try really hard to remember my personal stuff when I go to in a session where I'm trying to utilize motivational interviewing or I'm working with that person and have some validation for them and remembering how hard it is for me when I'm wanting to change something. So when we look at the concept of ambivalence, this is a normal part of preparing for change, and it's often a place where people can remain stuck for quite some time. When a directing style approach is used and argues for change with a person who is ambivalent, it naturally brings out opposition in people. So if somebody came up to me and said, Allison, you don't eat very well, you need to change your diet right now. There's probably already been damage to your organs because of all of the horrible things that you eat, and you need to do this immediately. Well, I'm not going to be super happy, I can tell you that. I might sit there and just like eat bacon and look at them, because that's just kind of like the kind of person who I am. And so at that point, I am going to become resistant and spiteful, unfortunately, um, even though I know it is the truth, right? And so that is really where I want people to kind of remember that in the concept of ambivalence and what that means when we kind of go head on at people. People are more likely to be persuaded by what they hear themselves say. And I'm sure that you all have come into contact with this, or experienced this. This is also one of the big reasons why, whenever we're creating behavior plans for people, we want to incorporate them in that process. What do you think you can do? What do you think you can't do? What behaviors would you like to change and work on? Because if they're a part of that process and they help dictate that process, the chances of having their buy-in is going to be much higher and that they're going to be more successful. I know this is a very true statement with my son. I can tell you that anytime I tell him anything, I'm wrong. It doesn't matter what I say. I think it goes through some kind of filter, like a teenager filter. And then it's just garbly, stuff that he doesn't want to hear and he gets mad about. But then like 2 or 3 days later, he will say the exact same thing that I did, and support it. And I'm like, yeah, there's no point. So just remember that if people come up with it on their own, they're going to be persuaded by it more than if you were the one who kind of brought up that idea or that suggestion for them. Okay, I think you guys know this, but I also want you to remember how quickly we can fall into these traps with people. Confrontation is linked with very poor outcomes. Success linked to high levels of accurate empathy. It increases defensiveness and it decreases likelihood for change. It's the opposite approach of other therapy styles where the clinician is the one to voice the concerns. And so confrontational methods associated with change um, definitely have much more poor outcomes. So if you look at like the root of the word, to confront means to get face to come face to face with somebody with a difficult reality, but this is the goal. So how do we do it? And then if you kind of want to remember the issues that can happen with confrontation, this could be due to judging. It could be due to a difference in values. And so I think I see that a lot too whenever somebody is making a not so desirable choice or something that is maladaptive or might be damaging to them. The person who seems to be the most um, kind of motivated to get that person to change, it seems to be that they do not like what they're doing. And a lot of times I've seen it because they're either judging them or maybe there's a values issue. Maybe this person is really against that behavior or it's against their personal values or beliefs or whatever it is. And so they think that person should change and stop doing that. And I have to convince you of it. And I have to show you why this is not good and you should change. But guess what's going to happen in that relationship? It's going to go badly. There's going to be damage. The rapport is going to be hurt. That person might become very spiteful. And they might start even engaging in other maladaptive behaviors because of that. Oh, I'm going to show you. Or you think that's bad. Wait until you see this. And so there is just nothing really positive that comes from that confrontational approach. And I personally do understand how easy it is to fall into that. I can remember so many times where I have slipped into that kind of approach with somebody. And even some of the times in the moment, I realize how judgmental I'm being or even hypocritical, right? So I was serving somebody with IDD in the community. They had type 1 diabetes and their blood sugar was so dysregulated that they would have numbers in the 600s, 700s, 800s. And I know those of you who are, know of it, what your blood glucose should be, you're probably very shocked right now. And I was too. I didn't know how this person survived that. They did get hospitalized a couple times for it. But my job in that situation was to try to help manage that, right? To help lower that blood glucose level. And it was very difficult in the beginning. That person and I did not get along. We kind of clashed. And I was falling into this confrontation trap because what they were doing is when they would go and visit other family members, they would get into their fridge, they would consume all the things that they weren't supposed to, and their blood sugar would just spike. And I was really trying to convince them not to do that. And it didn't work for me. And it caused a lot of therapeutic damage to my rapport with that person. And so what I ended up having to do was really back the train up a lot and go back to square one of building rapport with that person. And so then I built in a lot of other things, not just the motivational interviewing component, but medical interventions. And so then I would help take that person to like different uh, medical people who would help kind of explain what they should be doing. And they did it in a very, very nice approach. But I just want you guys to remember that, like, in the moment, you guys can fall victim to that. I can tell you so many times I have. And once you realize that's happening, pull yourself out, just stop it, start over, and just back up. Okay, it's going to be okay. You're going to make some errors along the way, I promise you. And one of the things that I have found out while trying to utilize motivational interviewing, specifically like in my world with my clients and my sessions, is that when you first start, it's pretty messy. You're going to kind of trip up on things. And so practice is going to be your best friend in that situation. Okay, so let's go forward. And I want to start with the spirit of motivational interviewing. And there's going to be quite a few acronyms today. The first acronym is PACE. And this is the spirit of motivational interviewing. So partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. And so we're going to go through all four of these and what they mean in the reference of motivational interviewing. And so looking at partnership, this is something that is done with and for the person, right? The interviewer tries to create a positive interpersonal atmosphere that is not coercive. It is a meeting of aspirations, and honesty about them is essential. It is like an unpatronizing collaboration with the patient, communication on equal terms, in which the clinician does not assume the role of the expert superior to the patient. And so I'm sure you have experienced it or you have witnessed it where you might go and walk into a situation where you're going to be having a session with a client or a meeting with somebody you're working with or you're observing it. And right off the bat, you can tell, okay, that's a professional. They're the ones in charge. They're the ones kind of running the show. And then the person that they're meeting with is kind of at the mercy of them. And so we really want to throw that out the window with motivational interviewing. It's a collaboration with the person. There shouldn't be this off balance of, who's in charge, who's not in charge. It's supposed to be kind of like a dance with that person, and you're supporting their autonomy and their aspirations, right? You're kind of help guiding them. You are not the one driving it, and you are not the one in charge. I think that there's a lot of ways that you can look at what you're doing that may assert yourself as the professional in that situation, the expert. Yes, that is our role, and that's why we're there, but we don't want it to be obvious and kind of in the face of the other person, right? Because then that's going to change their behavior. I'm sure you guys have maybe been in situations where you're talking with somebody and every single thing that they say to you is like the answer that they think you want, that they want you to hear, right? What does this person want to hear? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I definitely am not going to do that anymore. Or I know that's really bad for me. Or I know that's really dangerous, right? And it's just all these answers of like what they think you want to hear. Well, that's not ideal, right? And I think a lot of times that comes from that kind of like superiority issue of like, this is the, one of the important people, or this is the professional person, or this is the person that I have to impress or convince that I'm going to be okay. And that's just, I mean, who's that going to benefit, right? Saying things that aren't true and telling you what you want to hear. I mean, that's just really not going to go anywhere positive. And so you want to do things that are going to facilitate that relationship of a partnership, right? A lot of times I try to give somebody a lot of control over their environment and control over what their time with me looks like. And so I always do a scent every single time I meet with somebody. Do you want to meet with me today? Yes or no? And I give that person that choice every single time. So they have that autonomy. Where would you like to meet with me today? Do you want to sit outside? Do you want to sit in here? And give them that control over the environment and the situation. And I will even ask things and say, like, is it okay if I write things down? Or would you rather me not? Or can I ask you a couple of questions? Is that okay? And so I'm establishing the relationship and trying to have us kind of on like this level playing field and not asserting myself as the professional in that situation. Now, every person and every situation is going to be a little bit different, but I want you to think about your situation and if there are things happening or things that you're doing or not doing that are already setting that relationship off balance. And you need to kind of balance that and make it a partnership from the very beginning. Okay. Second letter in the acronym, acceptance. I personally think acceptance can be a very difficult thing to do. The concept in itself is pretty easy, but actually practicing it can be really hard. I think part of it is that judgment can come very easily for some of us, and we have just kind of like those automatic thoughts. And then that kind of impacts the way that we think and interact with the person and can make acceptance pretty much impossible. So, acceptance is something that I believe has to be practiced to be true and genuine. And motivational interviewing is an attitude of profound acceptance about what the client brings. Accepting does not mean approving. Okay, so those are very different things. Just because we accept something does not mean that we approve of it or believe it. Those are very different things. And so somebody tells me, I'm smoking because my grandma said it makes me cool. Now, that I might know that that is not true at all, that that never happened. But in that moment, I have to accept that that is what that person is telling me. And that is probably if that is what they believe, or if that is what they want me to believe at that point in time. And so I don't have to approve of it. I don't have to believe it, but I am going to accept that that is what they are saying at that moment in time. Absolute worth, the acceptance of the person as an individual and that they have worth, accurate empathy, an active effort and interest in understanding their perspective. That can be very challenging for people, I think, whenever you have that clash of values, and where people become very judgmental. And so I think that's a hard one for people to do and to step back. And so I think a lot of times in motivational interviewing, this is where people need to spend some of their time and learning how to let go of that, learning how to practice acceptance for people and accepting that person and understanding their perspective. Autonomy support, their right to self direction. Affirmation, find and acknowledge the person's strengths and efforts. And so when we're looking at kind of that concept of acceptance and empathy towards the patient's needs and experiences and points of view, in addition to like an unconditional regard for that patient, that includes ensuring their autonomy of choice and decision making in relation to behavior change, as well as their desired goals and methods of change. And so that's that patient autonomy. And so, like, let's say that I am talking with somebody and I am wanting to work with them on sending inappropriate pictures to people. And so their decision is that they are only going to send inappropriate pictures to one person instead of, however many, or they're going to cut down the number of inappropriate pictures that they're going to send. Now, in my mind, I may not like that, and I may not think that that's a great step, or a choice, but I want to support that person's autonomy and their support in the direction that they are going at that moment in time. Because chances are, if I confront them, or if I put on the brakes, or if I challenge that, then they're just going to say, well, I'm not going to do anything at all, or what's the point, or I'm just going to do whatever I want, right? And so it can be really difficult at time to do these things, to have empathy, to not judge somebody, to have acceptance. And I think this is something that you're really going to have to practice, especially if you're clashing with a person. And that's where I see it's the most difficult. If somebody just genuinely doesn't like that person, which happens, they don't like the things that they're doing, or if it's a clash in like values and beliefs and things like that. And so maybe in that situation, if that person can't learn these things like acceptance and empathy, then they do not need to be the person engaging in motivational interviewing with that other person. If they cannot have these principles in place and practice them, then it's not going to be beneficial for that person, and somebody else needs to be doing it at that point. Okay, compassion, other part of our acronym. We want to actively promote the other's welfare and give priority to the other's needs. This is also a new part of the spirit and was added because it was felt that many clinicians could practice the principles in pursuit of self-interest, right? And so they weren't doing the program or working it because they genuinely had compassion for the person. They was wanting to like fix the person or be successful or whatever it was. So this has to be in your heart. It has to be in the right place, so that the trust is deserved. And I think it can be really difficult, depending on what field that we work with, to remember to have all of those things kind of running around in the forefront and back front of our brain, because our days are very stressful. I know for me personally, my job is pretty high stress. I'm managing a lot of different things at a lot, at once, and it can be hard to remember to have compassion, to have empathy, to have acceptance. And so there's a lot of times where I have to take 5 minutes and sit in my car and remind myself of these things before I go in and have a session with somebody. Because if I go in tired and frustrated and just, trying to keep to my schedule and that sort of thing, it's probably not going to be ideal and it's probably not going to go well. And then the last part of the acronym PACE is evocation. So this is the idea that people already have much of what they need in them to change. Deep well of wisdom and experience within the person and the counselor can draw on that. Evoking what is already present, not installing what is missing. Already have the pro change and pro status quo argument within it, and we want to evoke and strengthen the change motivations already there. And so the evoking motivation to change by exploring and reinforcing the patient's reasons for change. This also includes developing discrepancy between current problem behavior and then the patient's goals and values. So for example, you said that it's important to you to do more exercise again. How does that tie in with your smoking? We want to draw out the person's priorities, their values, and wisdom to explore reasons for change and support success, right? So it is within that person. We are just trying to evoke it from them. And that's why, you look at the title motivational interviewing, right? So we are interviewing this person to try to draw out these things within them, to find out what are their priorities, what are their values, what strengths do they already have inside of them, and what are their reasons for doing things. Because if I come at somebody with a reason that is not their reason, if I say, you're drinking 10 Coca-Colas a day while you're at day services, and that is not healthy for you, and they don't care about being healthy, well, guess what? They're probably not going to stop drinking 10 Coca-Colas. But if I tell them that, what are some of your values and what are some of the things that are important to you? And then they say, oh, well, keeping my job at night or going to day services and being with my friends. There we go, right? That's the reason for change. That's their value. And if you keep drinking 10 Coca-Colas a day, then you're not going to get to do those things. I'm not going to say that, but that's where I want to guide that discussion, right? So do you think if you keep drinking all of that soda every day, are they going to let you come back? No. How does that line up with, you wanting to be there every day with your friends and enjoying the day? Yeah, that's probably not going to work very well, right? So if you can see how you want to guide that discussion after finding out what are the things that are important to them, their priorities, their values, and things of that nature. And so we want to use that evoking motivation for that person to find out within what is important to them. I know, like for me, whenever I got pregnant with my son, I was a smoker and I didn't care about my health at all. But I stopped because I was pregnant with another human being and I didn't, want to hurt that person. And so that was like my motivation right there, right? So if somebody said, oh, hey, Allison, you're damaging your lungs and your heart, and I don't care, right? Obviously I knew that. I can read, I know what's going on, and I know all that information. But then, hey, you've got another person inside of you and that is going to hurt them. Oh no, I am not going to do that. right? So there's kind of like an example of finding that person's values and their motivation for change. I think right now would actually be a really good time to stop for Q&A prior to break.
Perfect. We do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first question comes from Ellen. And Ellen asks, can you talk about strategies for how to ensure that someone understands something, especially if I think she meant they don't have the ability to repeat back what was said? Visual aids, anything else you found effective?
I would say one of the most common things that I use is comprehension checks.
Mm,
So I will say something and then I will ask that person, can you repeat that back to me? Or can you tell me, what you heard in your own words? And to me, that is one of the best ways that I know that somebody can stay engaged with me and then understand what I'm saying is that then if they can summarize it in their own words and repeat what I'm saying. I've found that visual aids and some of those things that sometimes there's too much cueing in those that they can kind of pick up on the context and fill in all of the gaps necessary. Because whenever you're working with somebody in IDD, a lot of times, they want to be right
mhm.
and they don't want to be wrong in social situations. And a lot of times people are very good at picking up on context clues and then filling in all of those gaps to what am I supposed to say right now or what's happening or what is that person saying because I don't want to look wrong and having something wrong in this situation. So for me, and some people might have a different experience, but comprehension checks I think are one of the best ways that I've done that.
Great, thank you. And if anyone else has any other suggestions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we can all kind of learn from them. Um, the other question that we had is from Melissa, who asked, is there specific training on motivational interviewing?
Yes, there definitely is. Laura, I think that's something that I could possibly share a few things with you if you wanted to send it out, like with the
Oh, yeah.
slides and that. I could include some links and information on that.
Absolutely. We can for sure include that when we send a message out to attendees today. So
Yeah,
yeah.
they have like workshops and different
Yep.
things like that. There's a lot out there. So I'll include some of the top recommended ones,
Melissa says thank you in the chat.
of course.
Great. Okay. Those are all the questions we have right now.
Okay.
Please, everybody, keep them coming. We are now going to pause for a break. It's almost 10 o'clock, so why don't we break until 10:10? And we'll see everybody back here then. Enjoy your little mini break. Thanks so much. Okay, everybody, it's 10:10. Hope you had a good break. And we are back. I'll turn it back over to you, Allison.
All right. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just going to jump right back in and we are going to talk about the writing reflex. And I've mentioned this, but just to kind of bring up the actual kind of terminology for it, this is the belief that you must convince or persuade the person to do the right thing. Questions are the opposite of the writing reflex. And so I think in kind of keeping in mind when you're jumping into motivational interviewing, if you're feeling uneasy about what you're doing, I think asking questions is a very good way to approach it. So counselors often miss that they are kind of in the midst of this writing reflex and often think or feel that they need to ask the right questions. They just need to find the proper arguments to convince somebody. They need to provide the client with critical information. They need to provoke the decisive emotions to make that change occur. A lot of times I will see that occur in kind of like those, what people kind of call it come to Jesus moments or conversations where they're trying to just get that person to understand what's going on and realize that they need to have this big change. And unfortunately, that does not work. Um, that they need to pursue the correct logic to make the person see the change. And chances are that's just not going to work for you, right? And so that's why the questions are the opposite of the writing reflex, because that you can gain that person's knowledge, their history, their motivation, their values, their priorities. And within that, you can kind of see what direction do I need to go and how do I help guide it in that direction. This is really prevalent in substance abuse counseling, and the belief was that clients already had their pathological defenses torn down before they could change. And they would confront the client, provide the solution. If you meet resistance, denial would kind of pump up. And then they would just kind of repeat the same sequence over and over and over, confront the client, provide the solution. Unfortunately, that, just doesn't work and creates resistance, and really damages the therapeutic rapport between the person and the counselor or therapist. So here's some really good example questions. Why would you want to make this change? How might you go about it in order to succeed? And so like I like that question a lot, because some people have ideas of how they want to see that change happen. But that might not be what's going to work for that person. And if you think about like quitting smoking, right? Be like, well, just quit. Like it's horrible for you. Just put it down and don't smoke. But then the person who is looking at quitting smoking, they might say, well, I want to cut down one cigarette a day. And for the other person, that might not seem like very much, right? Like, well, that's just one cigarette, that's not going to make a difference or that's not going to make a change. But that's something that they're willing to start with. That is how they can start in the order to succeed and something that they are willing to do. And so go with it. It's one less cigarette, it's a step in the right direction. We want to praise that and go with it. Some other example questions are, what are the 3 best reasons for you to do it? So find their priorities, find their motivation. Chances are it's going to be pretty different than what yours would be or what you think would be the reason for them to change. How important it is for you to make this change and why? How confident do you feel about being able to make this change and why? So what do you think you will do? Right? And so those are all really good example questions to use to avoid that writing reflex. Okay, so we are going to jump into the theoretical model and stages of change. And so we talked about earlier in the beginning that people are going to have that varying degrees of stages of change, right? So we have pre-contemplation, which is the person's not thinking of making a change now or in the future. They are like, I am totally okay with what I'm doing. I have no problems with it. And I have absolutely no desire or wishes to change what I'm doing. Then after that is contemplation. They're aware that they need to make a change, right? Like I'm doing this behavior, I'm eloping, or I'm spending all my money in one day, or whatever it might be. I know that that's not ideal, and I need to change it. I just don't really know what to do, or if I'm ready to do it, or how, right? And then after that is preparation. So that is where the person is weighing the pros and cons and planning how to make a change. So at that point, they are ready, right? They're like, okay, yes, I know this isn't ideal. I do enjoy it. But how am I going to do this? I've got to make a plan. And that working at that plan with the therapist or counselor or supportive person. After that is action. And this is where the person decides to change and is attempting to do so. And following that is maintenance, maintaining the changes. The other thing that I want everyone to kind of remember too is that a person can fluctuate throughout all of these stages, right? So they may be in maintenance, and then backslide all the way back to contemplation potentially, and then have to kind of go through that once again. And so a person is not necessarily going to be stagnant in one place, and then just go down the order and then stick in maintenance, right? The person can fluctuate through all of those, and that can change depending on what's going on in their life and in the moment. So they may have some relapses and then have to go through that again. Okay, so these are the processes for the therapist or counselor. And we are going to be focusing on engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning. So motivational interviewing has evolved considerably since its initial development in the 1990s. While prior motivational interviewing application focused on four principles: express empathy, develop discrepancy, roll with resistance, and support self-efficacy, motivational interviewing is now based on four processes. So the original four principles have been folded into the four processes as reflective listening or strategic responses intended to move conversations along. These processes help practitioners frame a clinical session with their clients and provide specifics as outlined below. Okay, so this is when you're thinking of, how am I going to do this? How am I going to go into a session utilizing motivational interviewing? This is what you really want to focus on, is these four things. Okay, so we will start with engaging. And these are some questions to ask yourself. How comfortable is this person talking to me? So we really want both parties to establish a helpful connection and a working relationship. And this process by which both parties establish a helpful connection and kind of like building that therapeutic and working relationship together. So that person needs to be comfortable with you. If you're going to have a genuine conversation where somebody is going to be truthful and honest and discussing the things that they're doing, they're going to need to trust you and be comfortable with you. How supportive and helpful am I being? Do I understand this person's perspectives and concerns? So we don't just kind of want to go in with like, my goal is to change this one behavior. No, your goal should be to understand that person, understand their perspectives, understand their motivation, their priorities, have empathy, have compassion, and supporting that person in their autonomy on the journey of them trying to work on this themselves. How comfortable do I feel in this conversation? So I have seen this before where people are not comfortable talking about certain things. And it could be because of specifically the behavior or things that you're looking at changing. It could be the relationship with the person. It could be differences in beliefs and values. And it just makes a uncomfortable kind of situation. And so when looking at this, I think one of the very first questions that somebody should ask is, should this even be me? Right? Should I be the person doing this or working on motivational interviewing? Am I the best person for that? Or are my biases going to get in the way and prevent me from coming into it with the spirit that I should have? And there's a good chance that then maybe somebody else needs to be that person if you're not going to be able to drop that or to kind of let go of those things, because they are going to pick up on it. I guarantee you. If you do not like that person, if you're judgmental of them or their behavior or, anything of that nature, they are going to pick up on it and they are going to know, believe me. And does this feel like a collaborative partnership, right? And so it should be you and that person working together, not you controlling the situation or you being the one in charge or you being the professional. You're kind of going on this journey with that person. So looking at then focusing, here's some questions to ask yourself in regards of that. What goals for change does this person have? Do I have different goals for this person? Are we working together with a common purpose? Does it feel like we are moving together, not in different directions? Do I have a clear sense of where we are going? And does this feel more like a dance or a wrestle? So engaging leads to a focus on a particular agenda, right? So that's the goal of that. And what the person wants to address, not the clinician. Um, The provider may also have an agenda. So there may be a little bit of overlap and there might not be, right? So the clinician might think, well, we need to work on this and this is the problem, but then the person might not even identify that yet. And so really you're going to kind of have to go with the person on that one because we can't confront them about something, right? That's not going to work. We can't do it in that nature. And I think one way to kind of roll with it is to support them, try to work on successes, right? And then try to then maybe help if that those future kind of goals and things kind of guide in that direction, right? One or more change goals might emerge, and focusing helps identify direction. So when we look at evoking, you want to ask these things. What are the person's own reasons for change? Not why I wanted to change, right? So it could be, this is really challenging for my staff to deal with, or I have staff that are quitting because of this, or this is dangerous to my staff. But that's not going to be that person's reasons for change. You need to identify their reasons for change, not yours. Is the reluctance more about confidence or reluctance to change? What change talk am I hearing? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Am I steering too far or too fast in a particular direction? And am I the one arguing for change? Because if that's the case, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work. We want to elicit the client's own motivation for change, having the person voice the arguments for change themselves. So remember, if somebody says it themselves, they are more likely to have buy-in, they are more likely to believe it and then go forward with it. Okay, last of the processes is planning. What would be a reasonable next step towards change? What would help this person to move forward? Am I remembering to evoke rather than prescribe a plan? So we want to pull that plan out of the person, not tell them what we want them to do. Am I offering needed advice or information with permission? And am I retaining a sense of quiet curiosity about what will work best for this person? Um, I really want to kind of express like the challenges that can come up with the differences between people, the judgments that can kind of come in to play. And just because that you have judgments about somebody doesn't mean that you're a horrible person. You just have to recognize that and make sure that you're working on that yourself as a clinician and letting that go and staying into the processes that you need to be. I have caught myself so many times in those traps of judging somebody, being frustrated with them, just, kind of being irritated and like, well, here's the answer, this is what you need to do or not do. Why can't you see it? Or why can't you just do it? Or you don't see the damage that you're doing. And I get caught up in that so much. I think the other thing that is hard is whenever you just generally are having a hard time connecting with a person. I tend to be kind of like one of those tough grit kind of people of like, well, life's really hard and, you just need to deal with it. And, we all dealt with really hard things and we're still here and we're still kicking, that kind of thing. But I have to make sure that when I'm going into sessions with people, I don't carry that with me because I've noticed that that is a real rapport killer. And I have to back up on my empathy and validation of people. And so if they're saying like, well, I can't do anything because I'm tired all the time. And instead of thinking in my head and like judging them, like, well, I'm tired all the time, but I have to do all these things and I still do it. I have to let go of that and try to have some empathy and compassion for them and think, maybe they are very depressed and they are experiencing a lot of tiredness and those somatic symptoms. Maybe they have a trauma history. Maybe, there's something medical going on that we need to figure out as well. And so just really letting go of that so then I can engage in the processes of motivational interviewing and not getting stuck in those traps that I think a lot of clinicians and therapists do. So looking at skills of motivational interviewing. So here's the skills as a therapist that you want to go into the program with. open-ended questions, affirmations, reflecting or reflections, and summarizing. So ORS, like I said, we're going to have a lot of acronyms today. Here's one of them, ORS. And I also want to encourage the skills that are in here, and so that you can then work on training those skills specifically if you really need to beef up those areas. And so there's a lot of like active listening here, those type of skills. And I would also encourage people to really work on their validation skills as well. I feel like those are all key components of motivational interviewing. And so you can also key point those skills for training for yourself and just look at, I'm going to practice my active listening skills. I am going to work on my empathy. I am going to work on my validation because those are all part of it. And so even pulling out all of those pieces and working on them individually is going to be helpful as well. So these are considered the core counseling skills. Providers should use open-ended questions to invite clients to tell their story and obtain a meaningful understanding of the client's goals, values, and beliefs. For example, providers can ask questions such as, what was it like when you were drinking a 12 pack of beer a day? Or, what is it like for you whenever you elope from your solo home? Or what is it like whenever you're getting into arguments with people, or those type of questions? Just ask, what is it like for you, or what's happening, or anything. Open-ended questions. Don't fall back on those yes no questions. The other thing I think I see a lot of therapists and counselors do wrong is dominating the conversation and talking too much. For me, I don't typically have that issue because I don't like talking, and you're like, but Allison, you're talking for 2 hours straight today. But yeah, it's not like my favorite thing in the world. And so a lot of times I fall back on a lot of open-ended questions and then supportive silence. And don't forget that when working with people with IDD, that you might need to allow a longer response time, right? For processing, for coming up with those answers. So it's okay to sit there and be quiet for a little bit, right? I know a lot of people think that feels really uncomfortable, but it's actually called supportive silence, and there's nothing wrong with it. And so I might ask somebody a question, and then I am going to sit there and wait, and I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to let them process that and take the time that they need to answer the question. If it goes on a little too long, I might prompt and say, like, do you need me to ask that a little bit differently, or is there something I could help you with? But don't forget to give that extra processing time. You do not need to fill the space with all of your words. It is okay to be quiet. Using affirmation expresses genuine appreciation and confirms a positive regard for clients' hidden and expressed strengths. For example, you got discouraged last week but kept going to your meetings, or you were very persistent, or that's a really good idea on how you can avoid situations where you get triggered. And I know that when you're beginning or when you're working with somebody who might be very challenging, it can be really hard to find some affirmations, right? So I always try to find at least something. And some of my sessions, it has been, thank you for telling me that you don't want to meet with me today. So that's not ideal, right? Like the person didn't even come out of their room and they didn't want to meet with me, but they used their words to tell me they didn't want to meet with me. And in my opinion, that is a good thing. I didn't get punched. I didn't get things thrown at me. And so I am going to affirm that. I am going to say thank you for using your words to tell me that you didn't want to meet with me today. Or if things were a really rough session, I might just say thank you for meeting with me today, or thank you for talking with me today. I really appreciate it. You did a great job. So you're going to have to come up with something. If you're struggling, maybe even talk with somebody and say, hey, what can I say? What are the affirmations that I can use? Okay. And there's going to be something. You're going to have to find it. Reflecting. Reflective listening is fundamental to person-centered counseling and is one of the most important elements of motivational interviewing, according to Miller and Rolnick. So, reflections provide the client with the opportunity to verify that the provider's interpretation is congruent with the client's thought or intention. And so, these also kind of look a lot like reverse comprehension checks, right? So I might say, well, you're telling me that when the staff tell you to go to your room, that's when you get very angry. Is that correct? Is that right? Am I saying that right? So I am making sure that like I've got the right information. And it's called reflective listening. It is a key component of active listening and just basic therapy skills. And last on the list, we're going to look at summarization. And yeah, so we want to make sure that the provider is during a counseling session as a key element of reflective listening that distills statements that have been a particular meaning for a client and reflects them back to ensure the appropriate understanding of the client's full experience. So again, you can summarize, you can provide a concise statement of what was expressed, or they can guide change in the discussion theme. Okay, so those are the skills that you want to go into motivational interviewing with. A lot of active listening skills there. So if you need to work on that, just kind of look up those individual skills or look up active listening skills and work on training those for yourself. So looking at open-ended questions, you could say things like, help me understand, or how would you like things to be different? What do you want to do next? Tell me more about. And you can use extremes, like what's the best part of it? What's the worst part of it? And then just kind of remember those W ones, like, right? Like who, what, when, where, why. We want to encourage clients to tell their story in their own words. They enable you to explore, clarify, and gain insight into your client's world and demonstrate curiosity and interest in the person. Um, Importantly, using open-ended questions can prompt a discussion about the reasons for making changes. Again, when working with IDD, give time for processing and answering those questions. So you're going to want to give probably more time than normal for that process of them to kind of take in the information and answer the questions. Again, it's okay to sit there and be quiet while you allow them that time to answer. The other thing is kind of we talked about like discriminating who is going to be beneficial from motivational interviewing and who is not. So if you have somebody who is not an accurate historian, this is probably not going to be the best approach for them, right? Because when you start asking open-ended questions and you start kind of going through that, if you have somebody who makes things up or is not an accurate historian, that's not going to be helpful, right? It's just not going to work very well. And that's also, I think, an area where you can filter out the people that you're working with and whether this is a valid approach or not. If you start asking open-ended questions and you know for sure 100% that you are just getting things that are not accurate, right? Or if somebody maybe has a pretty severe mental health situation going on and they're reporting things that are just not congruent with reality, right? We've got some other things that we need to address at that moment in time. That person needs to be stable, not in a crisis situation, to be able to kind of use this approach, right? Because we have to be somewhat based in reality and be able to like have a conversation and answer questions. So affirmations, Miller and Volnick identify affirmation as a key element of motivational interviewing and building and maintaining a therapeutic relationship with the client. The use of affirmations identifies the client's strengths and acknowledges the client's efforts and their struggles. Personal affirmations are important supportive statements that help clients increase their confidence and their ability to change. Affirmations are statements of appreciation and understanding. These statements are intended to make the client feel supported by the practitioner, regardless of the status of their behavioral changes or attempts to change, and play an important role in building that therapeutic alliance. However, affirmations must be genuine for them to truly resonate with the client. One way to ensure authenticity is to focus on specific positive behaviors and acknowledge small successes. So here are some examples. I appreciate that you were willing to meet with me today. You are clearly a very resourceful person. You handled yourself really well in that situation. That's a good suggestion. If I were in your shoes, I don't know if I could have managed nearly so well. I've enjoyed talking with you today. And again, that needs to be genuine. You can't just say things that are, ingenuine and then expect that person not to pick up on that. It doesn't matter if they have IDV or not. I can tell you in all of my sessions that I work with people, they know if I am not feeling well, if I am tired, if I am frustrated with them, if I am having a bad day, they always know and they always pick up on it. So you need to go into this in the right headspace with the right heart and be genuine. Okay, reflective listening, repeating or rephrasing. The listener repeats or substitutes synonyms or phrases and stays close to what the speaker has said. The listener makes a restatement in which the speaker's meaning is inferred and the reflection of feeling. So the listener emphasizes emotional aspects of communication through feeling statements. This is the deepest form of listening. And so this is a primary skill used in motivational interviewing to demonstrate empathy, interest, and understanding. It involves the therapist hearing and understanding and then letting the client know that they are being heard and understood. In relation to encouraging behavior change, reflective listening helps to clarify and explore reasons for change. You do not offer your perspective, but instead keep the focus directly on what your client is saying. Although the primary focus is on what the client actually says, the therapist can also reflect what they notice in tone of voice, body language, and sometimes by noticing what is not said or gaps in the narrative. Reflective listening can be viewed as checking process to ensure that both the client and the therapist understand what is being communicated. Um, let's see here. Reflective listening is a primary skill in outreach. It is the pathway for engaging others in relationships, building trust, and fostering motivation to change. This appears easy, but I will tell you it does take hard work and a little bit of skill to do. Sometimes the skills we use in working with clients do not exemplify reflective listening, but instead serve as roadblocks to effective communication. Examples are misunderstanding what is said or assuming what a person needs. It is vital to learn to think reflectively. This is a way of thinking that accompanies good reflective listening. It includes interest in what the person has to say and respect for the person's inner wisdom. Listening breaks down occurs in three places. So the speaker does not say what is meant. The listener does not hear correctly. The listener gives a different interpretation to what the words mean. And so reflective listening is kind of meant to close that loop in the communication to ensure that breakdowns don't occur. The listener's voice turns down at the end of reflective listening statement. So this may feel presumptuous, yet it leads to clarification and greater exploration. Whereas questions tend to interrupt the client's flow. So some people find it helpful to use some standard phrases. So you feel, it sounds like you're wondering if. So there are three basic levels of reflective listening that may deepen or increase the intimacy and thereby change the effective tone of an interaction. In general, the depth should match the situation. And examples of the three levels include repeating or phrasing, paraphrasing, and reflection of feeling. So varying the levels of reflection is effective in listening. Also, at times there are benefits to overstating or understating a reflection. An overstated reflection may cause a person to back away from their position or belief, and an understated reflection may help a person to explore a deeper commitment to the position or belief. So I know that was pretty loaded, but I would say that's because reflective listening is a very important skill in motivational interviewing, and it seems very simple, but there's a lot kind of encompassed in reflective listening, and you can do a lot with it. Like they said, kind of benefits to over and under reflecting. That if you under reflect, you may be able to get that person to kind of bring out more and explore it a little bit deeper. If they over, they may correct you or to kind of, back away from something. And so there's a lot of ways that you can really utilize this skill to your benefit, and really beef it up in your therapist skill area. The other thing that I would mention is that, depending on the person that you're working with, sometimes I stick to more basic reflective listening skills and I do not change the words that the person says. I noticed that a couple times I was working with somebody and I was saying, using reflective listening, and I was changing some of their words because they were like cussing or using words that, maybe therapists might not use so much. And they would say, no, I didn't say that. I said this. And I was like, oh goodness, I'm so sorry. And so then I would repeat it word for word. And they were like, yeah, that's right. So every person's going to be a little bit different. And you're going to kind of be able to feel that out with the person. Okay, last one is summarizing. So here's the steps. We want to begin with a statement indicating you're making a summary. Give special attention to change talk. If they express ambivalence, it's helpful to include both sides. So on one side, you're saying that want to keep living here and you like your group home, but on the other side, whenever the staff do certain things, get really mad and want to hurt them, right? So that's kind of like also that ambivalence. It's useful to include information and summary statements from other sources. Be concise. End with an invitation. Am I saying that correct? Is that right? And depending on response, it may lead naturally to planning or taking concrete steps towards the change goal. So I had brought up, sustain talk and change talk. And so basically change talk is statements that favor making a change. So you might hear things like, I'm tired of feeling that way. I'm willing to try. I really want to be healthier. I want to stay here. I like my home. Those type of things. Sustain talk is statements that support not changing and sustaining where they are. So you might hear things like, I don't see the point. Things will never change. It isn't that bad. Changing my eating habits just seem too hard. And when you're listening for change talk, they recommend to use the acronym That Darn Cat, which is desire, ability, reason, need, commitment, activation, and taking steps. I'm actually not going to jump into this too much because I am going to provide these in a resources page for you. Here's one of the resources that I will be providing you. This is from the SAMHSA advisory page, and this is examples of darn cat statements. So listening for sustained change talk, and it has a lot of great information on here. You can use this during your sessions to kind of watch out for that talk. Okay. And then kind of just reviewing everything, generally, these are the 5 principles of motivational interviewing. So express empathy, develop discrepancy, avoid argumentation. It is a word. I looked it up. Roll with ambivalence or sustain talk, and support self-efficacy. So when we're looking at expressing empathy, we want to have learnable skills for understanding another's meaning through reflective listening, whether or not you've had similar experiences or not. This is done without judging, criticizing, or blaming, but with acceptance. It requires sharp attention to each new client, statement, and continual generation of hypotheses as to the underlying meaning. Your interpretation as to the meaning was reflected back to the client, often adding to the content that was overtly stated. And developing discrepancy. So the reason we want to do this is that we want that person to start kind of like seeing that discrepancy within them. So we want to create and amplify in the client's mind a discrepancy between present behavior and broader goals. So we're going to kind of take it that exists already, right? I, really enjoy stealing other people's food and eating it. But I also know that that's really unhealthy for me and it's making me sick at night, right? So we want to take those things and kind of like beef it up for them, blow it up so that they see that. Motivation for change is created when people perceive a discrepancy between their present behavior and important personal goals. We want to develop discrepancy, make use of it, increase it, and amplify it until the discrepancy overrides attachment to the present behavior. Needs to occur with the client. They should present the arguments for change. And I know this seems really obvious, but we want to avoid head-to-head confrontations. I think it is much easier for therapists and clinicians to fall into this than they realize. And I think once somebody realizes that they're in it, they've already been in it for quite a few minutes, and you got to back out of it. They're likely to emerge in regard to the importance counselors place on diagnostic labels, emphasis on self-recognition, ambivalence and sustained talk is a signal for the therapist to change strategies. And we want to just kind of roll with that ambivalence or sustained talk. Reluctance and ambivalence are not opposed, but are acknowledged by the therapist to be natural and understandable. The therapist does not impose new views or goals. Rather, the client is invited to consider new information and is offered new perspectives. Involving the client actively in the process of problem solving, they are a valuable resource in finding the solution to their problems. And the last principle is support self-efficacy. So a person's belief in their ability to carry out and succeed with a task. The goal of motivational interviewing is to increase their perceptions of their capability to cope with an obstacle and to succeed in change. The client not only can, but must make this change for themselves. A wide range of approaches and failures in the past just means that they haven't found the right approach. Okay, so I have really summarized the basics of motivational interviewing, and I'm sure you're all like, well, how do I use it? But my recommendation to you is that you are going to just have to jump in and start practicing. I know somebody asked a question about like more specific training, and I think that would be helpful too to kind of go through some of those certification process or training where you can actually have like modules where you can practice and using the skills and getting feedback. But today I really wanted to also wrap things up with showing you guys a non-example and an example of motivational interviewing so you can kind of just see it firsthand and you can see what it should look like and what it should not look like. And you guys are going to have to excuse me for a minute because my embed codes did not work. So I'm going to have to jump out and get another window open. And Laura, just jump in if there's any issues with people seeing what's going on.
Looks good. Just need
Okay,
to.
great. Thank you.
About tobacco use and how it affects their health. At times, you will also have a responsibility to talk to them about how secondhand exposure to their tobacco smoke affects other people's health. These can be sensitive topics, and it is important to keep in mind that the way you approach your patients about these issues will have a big impact on how your advice and concerns are received. In general, it is not useful to confront or scold your patients about their tobacco habits, as that approach is usually not well received by patients and may interfere with your ability to counsel them effectively. Watch what happens as this provider becomes more and more confrontational in her warnings about tobacco use and her advice to quit smoking.
Okay, so I wrote a prescription for an antibiotic for Aiden that should help with the ear infection, but in looking through the chart, I mean, it seems like he's had 6 or 7 of these just in the past year or so.
Yeah.
That's really a big problem.
Yeah, it's pretty stressful for both of us. He gets really upset.
Well, one of the primary risk factors for multiple ear infections in kids is actually smoke exposure. Are you smoking?
Yeah, I do smoke, but I don't smoke around him. I try really hard not to smoke around him.
Well, the fact that he's having these ear infections is indicating to me that he is being exposed to smoke, and so what can you tell me about that?
I don't know. I mean, I try really hard not to smoke around him. I don't smoke in the car. When he's home, I go outside to smoke. I mean, I know it's bad, and I know it's bad for him, so I don't want him to be around it, so I try really hard.
I really need you to quit smoking, both for your health and for Aiden. Did you know smoking around your child is associated not only with ear infections, it could get to the point where you have to put tubes in his ears pretty shortly here, but also things like vitamin C deficiency, cavities, like dental cavities, behavior problems, asthma, other upper respiratory infections. It's really putting him at a lot of risk. In addition to that, kids of smokers end up smoking themselves. Do you want him to grow up to be a smoker?
No, but I don't smoke. I've thought about quitting, but it's really hard, so I just don't know how to do it.
Well, now's the time to quit. It's really gotten to the point where you can't keep smoking. Not only for him, like I said, but also for you. You're putting yourself at risk for lung cancer, for emphysema, for oral cancers, for heart disease, for all kinds of things.
I know. I've heard, people have told me before, I've heard all that. I just don't know how to do it. How am I supposed to quit? It's so hard.
Well, there's all kinds of things you can use now. It's not as hard as it used to be. You can use nicotine replacement. There's patches, there's lozenges, there's gum, there's the inhaler, there's nasal spray. We can talk about medications. You can try Chantix, you can try Zyban. There's quit smoking groups you can go to. There's hotlines you can call.
I just don't have time
There's
for
no
any of
reason
that.
why you shouldn't be able to quit. This is really important.
I understand that. I know it is. I mean, everybody has problems, right? It's just really, really hard.
Well, what can be more important to you than
Okay, so I am going to stop it there because I want to have a chance to share the other video with you guys to show the non-example. But if you guys kind of noticed, let's see here.
Watch what happens this time when the provider cues into what the
Okay, so again, Laura, if something's not looking right or sounding right, just let me know. So this is going to be the same situation with the doctor and the lady, but this is going to be an effective approach from a motivational interviewing standpoint. And so if you guys kind of notice like the education component in that last video, like people get sick, they need antibiotics, you are going to develop lung cancer and heart disease, right? Like, so that trying to just convince the person of the change. And if you saw, she kind of just was getting a little bit, frustrated and defensive about the situation. So we're going to jump into an effective approach using motivational interviewing.
parent is saying, empathizes with her situation, and attempts to work with the parent to find.
Okay. I did want to talk to you, though. I'm a little bit concerned looking through his chart at how many ear infections he's had recently, and I noticed that you had checked the box that someone's smoking in the home, so I was wondering if you can tell me a little more about that.
Well, it's just me and him, and I do smoke. I try really hard not to smoke around him, but I've been smoking for 10 years, except when I was pregnant with him. But it's so stressful being a single mom and having a full-time job, and so that's why I started smoking again.
You have a lot of things going on, and smoking's kind of a way to relax and de-stress.
Yes, yeah. Some people have a glass of wine, I have a cigarette.
Sure. And it sounds like you're trying not to smoke around him. Why'd you make that decision?
I know it's not good for him. I mean, I've read those things about ear infections and asthma and stuff, but other kids have ear infections and their parents don't smoke.
So on the one hand, you're worried about how your smoking might be affecting him, and on the other hand, you're not so sure if it's really the smoking that's causing these problems.
Right, yeah. I mean, he doesn't have asthma. He hasn't had a lot of other problems that his other friends have. So, and I've thought about quitting before in the past, but I just don't see how it's possible right now.
What made you decide to quit smoking when you were pregnant?
Well, he was inside me and we were sharing everything, and I knew that he would get some of that, and I just didn't think I could live with myself if something happened to him.
Right now, though, it feels almost too difficult to even manage or even to try.
Yeah, exactly.
How were you successful when you quit before?
I don't know. I think about it now. I don't even know how I did it. I just did it. I just couldn't imagine like him not being born or going into labor early and him having problems and stuff like that. All the stuff that they talk about with women who smoke. So I that was just enough to say, okay, you know what? I'm not going to risk that. So
The risks were so scary then that you were able to stop. Like,
Yeah.
they don't feel as scary to you now.
no, I mean we're two separate people, and like I said, I try really hard not to smoke around him. I'm pretty good about that. I don't let other people smoke around him. So
You're doing the best you can do.
yes. Yeah.
Okay, but it sounds to me too like part of you really does want to quit.
Yeah, I know that I need to, and I keep every new year I say, okay, this year I'm going to quit smoking, but then something happens and it just doesn't.
It's
and
on your
quitting
to-do
doesn't
list,
happen.
it's just not making it to the top.
Yeah.
If you did decide to quit, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not at all confident, you don't think you could do it, and 10 is you feel pretty certain that you could, where do you think you fall right now?
Probably like a 5. Kind of in the unsure area. Like I know I've done it before, so I know I can do it, but at the same time, it just seems really hard, and it's
Sure.
not the same situation.
Well, what made you say 5 rather than 2 or 3?
I know all the ways it's bad for me, and I don't want him to grow up thinking that it's okay to smoke. I don't want him to use any kind of, I don't want him to chew or anything like that. So I know I need to, especially before he gets old enough to understand what mommy's doing, but I just don't know if I can do it.
Okay. So it sounds like you have a lot of reasons why you'd like to quit. You have been successful quitting in the past, and right now you're just feeling a little bit hesitant about your ability to do it.
Yeah.
Where do you think we should go from here?
I don't know. I'd like some help.
So I'm actually going to stop the video right there because that was kind of a perfect point to kind of talk about some of these skills that she was using during that process. If you guys notice that she was asking a lot of questions and kind of saying, well, what helped you do this in the past and what was successful before, and instead of just saying, this is really dangerous and you need to quit for yourself and your baby. And so if you notice that she was doing a lot of that, where she was explaining, asking those questions, right? And that's one of the skills that we really wanted to look at using. Another thing that then she was doing was asking, on a scale of, 1 to 10, how successful do you think that you could be? Or, how much do you think that you can do this and how can you change? And then why wasn't it a 2 or why wasn't it a 3? And then asking that next question, kind of that planning process of saying, well, where do you think we can go from here? Instead of the doctor saying, you need to quit and this is how you need to do it, she's saying, where do you want to go from here? And I know I cut some of those videos a little bit short, but I want to respect everybody's time today as well. And I know that I wanted to show you guys an ineffective example as well as an effective example. And I'm just going to kind of wrap everything up today by saying, I know this was a really general overview today, but I hope that it motivated you guys to realize that this could be really effective in utilizing it in your day-to-day with the people that you interact with. And the number one thing that I am going to say to you is practice makes perfect. Just jump in there and start paying attention to the questions that you're asking, avoiding getting into arguments, having compassion and empathy, and got help with that person to make that a process between the two of you that you're navigating with that person together. So Laura, I am just thrilled to have been here today. I am so grateful for this opportunity and grateful for everybody attending today.
Well, thank you so much, Allison. Those videos were super helpful. Thank you. I did pull just 2 questions out of the chat, which we're going to get to in a minute, but I want to do just a quick wrap up for anybody who has to go right now and can't stay for an extra 2 or 3 minutes. Just the housekeeping stuff. So I just want to thank everybody for logging on today. I want to thank you, Allison, so much. This was terrific. Melissa shared in the chat the links to the evaluation and the post test, both of which must be filled out. within the next week in order to be eligible for CEUs. You will also receive an email later today, if you don't grab the link in time here, that has those links. The post test and the evaluation will close a week from today on Friday, April 17th. We can't give extensions, we can't make exceptions. If you have any questions about CEU stuff, just contact us through Eventbrite, and we can get you an answer there. Okay, so the two questions that I had were one was from Amy, and she asks, and I heard you sort of peppering this information throughout your talk, sort of after she asked this question. But I think I agree, Amy. I think that this is worth sort of going over again, or seeing if you have any more information about this, which is there anything like this is a great summary of motivational interviewing, super helpful. Is there anything specific that people who are working with IDD populations should like change or adapt when using motivational interview as compared to, using it with other populations?
Yeah. So I think a couple of the things that I definitely recommend is to maybe slow it down at first. I would, whenever I use this in the population with IDD, a couple things that I do is I just slow my roll. I allow time for processing. I allow time for the answering of the questions. And then I think the other thing that I think is really important is to also just keep in mind the challenges that come into working with the IDD population and being aware of their history and the challenges that might come with that or the trauma that that person might has experienced. And so that might make this process take a lot longer and be a lot slower. And so I don't want that just to discourage people because I think as a clinician, we can really get discouraged if we feel like we're not seeing successes. And so I think that you can just kind of assume that this is going to probably take a lot longer than it would within the typical developing population. And that is a-okay. That's perfectly fine.
Super helpful. I think that, and Amy also popped on the chat just to tell you thank you for that as well.
Right.
That's helpful. And the only other question that I have right now kind of dovetails onto that. Barbara asked, "What is too long for silence?" You talked about sitting in silence, which I thought was like so wonderful and helpful. She said, "What's too long for silence? I have clients that I have to provide a shift."
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And I think that you're going to have to feel out that person. Usually, if I'm going a couple minutes, like if I'm going about 2 minutes and it's still crickets, then I either might repeat, I might do a check-in with that person and say, like, how are you feeling right now? So they may be tired, they may be overwhelmed, maybe they just took meds and they're kicking in. You never know what's going on with that person. A lot of times when I am working with people with IDD, I'm trying to see if I have a sheet with me right now that I could show you guys. But I have like a feelings chart that I add. I will just show them and say, hey, can you tell me where you are right now?
Mm.
And sometimes I use like words, sometimes I might use faces. The other thing is with the silence, it could be an avoidance technique. And that the person is just trying to avoid you specifically. And so I might offer a break. I might offer changes in the environment. So usually if I'm going maybe 2 to 3 minutes and it's still, chirping crickets going on, that's where I'm going to shift and kind of feel out that person and where do I need to go from there.
Super helpful. Thank you so much. Well, with that, I'm going to officially wrap things up and just thank you again, Allison. This was super
Yes.
terrific. And thank everyone else again. You have the links in the chat to the evaluation and the post test. And again, you'll get those in an email as well. Feel free to get in touch with us if you guys have any questions. And I will leave it at that. Happy Friday, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks so much.